Hello, I'm Ded Deb. I'm a cancer researcher by day, a visual artist by night, and a New Yorker at heart.
I don't know if I can beat that. I'm Buntaine. I'm a visual artist. I make work about neuroscience and consciousness, and I'm the director and editor-in-chief of SciArt Center and Magazine.
Oh, hi, I'm Contreras-Vidal from University of Houston. I'm a neuroengineer. I study the brain. I develop technology to help people with disabilities.
So how do you think the panel went?
Fantastic.
It went well. It was fantastic. There were two aspects of it. One where we were going, this is what we think we should do, and then there was the methodology aspect of it, when we are going back to what we said and putting it into structure so that it's easier for other people to follow.
Yeah, I think it went really well because good examples of how art informs science are hard to come by, but when I have to think of them, I think of you too. So, I think more people need to hear about this sort of thing.
I feel certainly more positive today. I mean, I think that this is just going to get better. The value of the art is unquestionable. And as we combine art with science, we understand about ourselves. We understand about innovation, about creativity, and how to harness that information for education, for art therapy, for developing new technology, and for breaking barriers among the field. So I think this is great.
Okay, so as Ian mentioned, my name is Buntaine, and I'm really excited to be here to kick off what promises to be an energizing and generative weekend. When Ian first talked to me about this conference, it sounded right up my alley because we're going to generate a lot of dialogue here, and I think we're going to actually accomplish something as opposed to other conferences which might be more geared towards presenting work that's already been done. We can do work here right now, and I think that's really exciting. I'm a professional artist with a background in neuroscience, so that's kind of where I come from, but I also run SciArt Center and Magazine in New York. We're engaged in the art-science intersection, so if you have questions about that, find me later. But what I want to get to is, we're all here because of our work or interest in the convergence of science and art, so where they meet, where they intersect. There's lots of different words for what we're talking about here. But we work in this field because art and science can do things together that they can't do alone. And fostering the potential for innovation is especially relevant and necessary when we face complex issues like climate change. And the science-art convergence takes many forms, as we all know, from influence to collaboration to physical and knowledge production.
Yeah, I think. Great, thanks.
One area that's been explored a lot and where I come from is how science influences art. So artists have been rapidly intaking science and technology for a long time, but in a focused way for the past 50 years or so. And it's this really fruitful way that art and science can interact. But the influence, of course, runs in both directions, and that's what we're going to talk about this morning. So how does art influence science? It's not as obvious, but as important, I think. So from scientists getting a broader perspective on their research through the lens of an artist, to visualizations which reveal something that numbers can't do alone, and cross-disciplinary collaborations which push science into boundaries which maybe it didn't think to go into, but should. We have three fabulous panelists this morning who will talk about all of this, and so they're going to present their work, and then we'll have a discussion and talk with you all. So I don't know who's going first. Maybe we'll just go right to left.
Sure.
All right.
Okay, good morning. It's very nice to see so many inquisitive faces. And thanks for coming up for the morning session. Thanks to the organizer for inviting me. And thanks, Julia, for the nice introductory remarks. I'm Ded Deb. I'm a cancer researcher. I'm a cancer researcher by day, visual artist by night, and a New Yorker at heart. So anything that I do or anything that I want to do has to do with cancer. And the struggle there is, unless I can show that my basic science research saved 50 cancer patients, no one is going to listen to me. Because everyone right now is looking for the short-term benefit of what we are doing. It's fine if it happens in 10 years, but most of the people would not stick around to have that interest to find out, oh, this person did this in past 10 years, and that's how we are having it now. It may be a cultural thing, it may be something that for a big problem like cancer or in climate change that we really want the results right now because people are dying. But that's the culture of the funding agencies, and we have to somehow get into that because we need money to do research. I do not have any PowerPoint presentations to show you what kind of work I do, but I think I will talk about one specific example where art informed science in my case, and hopefully we can take that to climate change with changing the details of different fields. So I had a strong desire growing up to be a scientist as well as an artist. I did not think about collaborating, I did not think about how to do it. There was no one to guide me how to do it. I just took classes for both. So one time it happened that cancer, because being a very complex disease, there are so many data points that we can see which we cannot know what to extract from there. We are looking for patterns. And then the other side of it is we do not have any preliminary data to make any hypothesis. There are areas in cancer research where we have not explored yet. So when I started thinking about it, I started drawing and doodling, and by miracle some idea emerged, and at that point I didn't even know whether this is going to be a hypothesis or not. So I started talking to people about it, and it looks like the specific idea that I had there came from chaos theory. Chaos theory was explored by a lot of artist friends of mine. I met a couple of scientists who looked into it from mathematics and physics perspective, but I did not really find anyone in cancer working on that. So cancer being a very complicated disease, there are a lot of information that we do not know of, and over time that information gets amplified in an iterative process of cell division in our body. So it goes to a point where it's entirely unpredictable how the patient is going to behave to certain therapies. I think it's somewhat similar to climate change, but I don't have the expertise. Maybe Josh can connect it there. So when I looked into chaos theory, there is this concept of intermittent period of intermittency, where a chaotic system, a very unpredictable system, can behave in orderly fashion in a predictable way for a very short amount of time. So when I came across that concept while doing my art, I thought, well, cancer is a chaotic system as it looks like, and what if we have that period of intermittency identified, and because there are very few outcome in that space during that time, it is very easy to treat the patients during that time. Because you know there are very few outcomes that they can have, as opposed to completely being unpredictable. So I took that to the laboratory. The second struggle was, how do I convince my boss, or how do I convince the people who are in the committee looking after my research? I think I took the approach of what every scientist would do. They would come up with a plan and then break it down and give it to the people in the committee, and it would follow the scientific standards so that they agree to it. In my side, in artistic studio, I kept exploring how I can approach this problem when I'm treating the tumors in laboratory animals. How do I dose the treatment? How do I space it out from that chaos theory standpoint? So ultimately it worked. The tumors reduced in the animals, and I was very happy in the basic science lab trying something very, very new purely from the artistic intuition. As a scientist, I'll be highly criticized for this because I do not know if my artistic intuition is reproducible. I do not know if this is going to apply to another cancer or to another drug. That's what scientists want to see because it's the broader impact that we are thinking about. But as artists has always pushed the boundaries, tried something new, tried to improve the time, money, and throughput of their work. I think this was an example, a very small example in my case, where art informed science.
Thank you. Yeah.
Anyone has any question or?
We will circle back around to all of this, but thank you so much. I think that's a great example of, and I love that you touched upon intuition, because I think that's something obviously that's shared by artists and scientists, and it's the hard to explain thing, but a common experience.
Great. So I have these slides. I have a couple of slides, a couple of videos. I'm Pepe Contreras-Vidal. I'm a neuroengineer from the University of Houston. And this is just some of the technology we use to listen to the brain. And the idea is to do it outside the lab. 90% or more of the studies in neuroscience are in very limiting conditions in the lab or the clinic. It's not really how the brain works. It's not really how the emotions affect our behavior. And so we are using technology to record the brain in action and in context outside in the lab. And art and museums provide a really unique opportunity to understand intentionality, to understand action, perception, memory, and intuition. And so this is just an example of at the Blaffer Art Museum in Houston, how we run these studies. And we use both a top-down and a bottom-up approach. A bottom-up is more like the artist approach, I would think, and the top-down is more hypothesis-driven. And the idea here is could we tease apart the different components of the brain that involved when we create, when we make a decision about, aesthetic decision about the art? Could we move to the next one? And this is an application of the technology. So we are using this, we call it EEG cap, to record brain activity from the brain to extract information about intention in this case. So this is an amputee that is thinking about grasping an object in front of him. So he uses visual information to obtain the different features of the object so that he can plan for that type of grasp. And we're listening to that activity, and we intercept those signals that then we can send to the prosthetic hand to achieve the movement. So he's regaining motor function by this brain-machine interface. And so at the core of this is the intention. And I think this is a common framework for whatever we do. What is the intentionality of the artist? What is the intentionality of the subject or the scientist? Could we go to the next one, please? So this is our science engineering approach. Please hit the next one. So we are at the intersection of engineering and neuroscience, so neuroengineering. Just keep going slowly, please. And so in this case, we are developing tools to understand the brain, to harness the brain activity, to, in this case, help people with disabilities by developing these brain-machine interfaces. And at the nexus of neuroscience and art is what is the neural basis of aesthetic perception. And for that, we partner with different museums in Houston and outside Houston to have access to a very large population of volunteers, to the general public. Because another problem in neuroscience is that most of the studies are very small, 10, 20 subjects. And we're very different, we're very unique, so it's very important that we sample a large portion of the population. So we're talking about tens of thousands or more volunteers that go to the museum with very rich demographics. And on the other hand, we are using the technology to investigate the creativity, the creative process, And so we are partnered with artists, and including children, and trying to understand this process. And there are many applications of this. We go to the next. So of course, understanding the brain, but also we have found a really great opportunity for citizen science, so engaging the general public in this scientific process. And this has applications also in education and learning. So this is the last video. This is an example of some of our studies. And the artist provides scientific input on the protocol, right? How we should run the experiment. And this is done in a museum with performing venue, so it's in front of the public. So we measure not only the brain activity, but also the gesture, the movement. So, this is about how art informs science, but one of the outcomes of collaboration with the artists is that these tools also help to augment the tool set of the artist. So, for example, so one of the dancers, we were able to connect her brain signals to all the computer control lights in the room, so she could use her brain activity to change the environment as she wanted. And so suddenly there's another way to control and to perform, and we call it neurofeedback. And so that was very interesting for the artist, and now we are looking at different ways. Another one is how best to understand these signals, right? So, this very high dimensionality of the brain, it's very hard to visually make sense of the information. And so we are using different senses. So for example, we project brain signals in terms of sound. So you see and you hear, perhaps also add tactile information. So you have different ways of interpreting the signals, and we have very powerful sensors and computation going on in the body and the brain, so we are harnessing that. And this is just the beginning, so I think this is a two-way road. And it has been fantastic. So the artists, some of them, they are embedded in the lab. We have an artist in residence program, so they come to the lab meetings. They make suggestions about the protocols. And remember, these are experiments conducted outside the lab, and we don't want to disrupt the creative process. So we ensure that the artist feels uneasy, that everything is as they want. And on the logistic point of view, it took time to get human subjects approval for these studies, because we don't want to disrupt the museum context. So we have anonymous informed consent. We display information about the event in a way that looks like part of the art, or part of the installation, so it's not disruptive and engages people, and also we can test many people. So, in the last year we have tested about 3,000 with the technology that we have. So we are making some progress, but still very small amount of data.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, I've had the pleasure of seeing Pepe's work happen live in action at a conference last year, and the field of neuroaesthetics, understanding the creative process and understanding art through neuroscience is something that's fascinating and also really problematic. Most of the research that's been done in this field so far is, someone gets stuck in an fMRI or they're stuck in a lab with a cap on, and then they're shown images of the Mona Lisa. By the way, nice socks over there, Mona Lisa socks. But they're shown images on a screen, or you watch a movie in an fMRI machine and it's tiny and you have headphones on and you're very uncomfortable, and they're measuring the aesthetic experience that way. And that's the way science has been done because people couldn't figure out a better way to do it. But Pepe's bringing it out. We view art in museums largely, so we should measure our experience of art in a museum. Of course, the technology is really complicated, and he's trying to figure that out. And so I commend you for your efforts. I was in a study once. I signed up and I watched a movie in an fMRI machine, and I don't know what this study was about because they don't tell you. But the whole time I was thinking, God, this sucks. And so those are the brainwaves they were measuring. Not my experience of the movie, but my uncomfortable kind of when is this going to be over thoughts. So anyways, his research is so cool. All right, let's move on to Josh. So take it away.
Hey, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. So my name is Josh Willis, and I'm a climate scientist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I study climate change and global warming and the rising of the oceans. In particular, lately I have been in charge of a mission an airborne mission to use airplanes to measure the impact of ocean warming on the melting of Greenland. So when I was an undergraduate, I studied math and physics, and I minored in theater. So I consider myself now a professional scientist and an amateur artist. And my art is theater, and in particular comedy. But when I finished my undergraduate degree, I kind of took on I realized looking back that I believed that was sort of the end of my artistic and creative life, that I would go on to become a scientist and study science and be very analytical. And there is this process in graduate school of kind of squeezing all the creative ideas out of your brain and forcing you to be very analytical. And it was only many years later when I found myself giving lots of public talks and trying to communicate about climate change in a way that really connected with people, that I realized that I was kind of missing something, and that I needed to go back and revisit one of my passions when I was young, which was theater. And I started taking classes in improv. In improvisational theater and comedy at the Second City School of Improv in Hollywood. And actually, right behind my head, if I lean over here, this is my PhD on my wall, and this is the certificate of graduation from the improv school. And it's actually slightly higher on the wall than the PhD because I consider it to be of slightly greater importance now. But what I realized in this journey of kind of, I guess, reawakening my own creative energy was that science actually is a creative endeavor when it's done properly, I think. And to me, one of the most important ideas of how art and science can intersect is really in the process of creating. Science is about discovery. It's about learning new things about the world, whether it be in medicine or climate or earth science or any science. And ultimately, to make big advances in these fields, we need to be creative as scientists. And I think really the one of the most important intersections between science and art that can happen is to kind of share in the process of both creating art and creating new knowledge, new science. And I started my own journey on this when I began trying to write the proposal for doing this mission. I was actually in a comedy class thinking about my proposal when I should have been paying attention to the actors on stage. And I actually came up with the name for the mission, Oceans Melting Greenland, or OMG for short. And yeah, sure, it was a bit of a joke and it's catchy, but it also embodied the three most important words in the mission that I was trying to accomplish, which are oceans melting Greenland. It's this idea that Greenland is not just melting because the air is warming, but it's also melting because the warming water is encroaching and actually in direct contact with the ice in Greenland. Conveying this idea was, I realized, part of boiling down what I was really trying to do. And in fact, actually later on, I tried my hand at some graphic design, and I created this logo, which I'll hold up, OMG. Hope you guys can see that. In doing this, I realized that I was actually kind of boiling down the ideas for the proposal. And in doing that, I was also paving the way to write something that was really innovative, to do something new that no one had ever tried before, and to learn something important about how the climate works. And since that time, I've worked with graphic design artists and photographers, and I'm actually really happy to say that I just recently agreed to hire a summer student who's going to come create a piece of original art based on the data and the work that we're doing with OMG. And so, to me, I think the relationship between art and science, just to reiterate, is one that should involve the process of doing both at the same time, and that we really need to learn to collaborate in both the doing of the science and in the creation of the art, because that process is what helps us learn, both to create new knowledge and to connect people with it and create new ideas as well.
Great, thank you so much, Josh. All right, so we're gonna start a little conversation here. I want to start with what you just said, Josh, about the process and maybe the process of working. There's a few. There's the process of working with an artist as a scientist. There's the process of working alongside an artist as a scientist and co-creating something together as something which comes back and influences your own science. And at least for Josh and Drew, they are both artists and both scientists. I don't know if you play an instrument or dance or, you know.
We all do.
Yeah, we all do, exactly. So so we all kind of collaborate within ourselves. That's the way I like to think about it. So yeah, I guess I just want to talk a little bit about that. Drew, you were talking about that earlier. And yeah, so any thoughts you have on that?
Well, I think there is this emerging, I should not say idea, but because it has been there already for a very long time, but people are voicing it now and the importance of it. This conversation that's going on in this conference today is a group of Leonardos where you will collaborate with each other, and that's where I think the process of collaboration comes into play. How do we define that process? So if I interpret your question correctly, from what I understand is that the groups of people, both scientists and artists, have to be extremely clear about what they want to do. It's at least the interest, if not how I would do it, but what's my interest and what I want to generate out of it. That's the first thing. The second most important thing is communication. In many aspects, if things go to some projects would move in, in a non-linear direction, in a non-linear way. If the scientist counterpart is thinking that, oh, this does not connect with my work, or this is not what I started when I was interested in, should be communicated immediately. That is crucial, because once that ship sails, then people just move away from each other, and then the things take much longer to come together. I think if these two aspects are very, very clear, and this is put into place with a standard of weekly meeting or daily meeting, and even if it comes to the mind of the artist at midnight that this is not what I wanted, it should be communicated immediately to the scientist counterpart. I think those are the two things I would say.
Yeah, and to be more specific, and I think you'll have a lot to say about this, Pepe, we have 3 people here who agree that art can successfully inform science. If you're trying to, what would you say to a scientist who kind of wants to bring that into their lab or into their research program, feels like that could be a helpful thing? They're going to have to write a grant for it. They're going to have to convince some sort of funder that, yeah, we need to bring in an artist. I know it sounds crazy because people don't usually do that, but we have 3 people here who have experience within that realm. So scientists want quantitative data, right? How do we come up with a measurement for the success of the impact of art on science?
Right, so that's an excellent point, and what has been working for me is to focus not only on the scientific aims of the grant of the project, right? And we're trying to understand the grammar of brain activity and map that grammar to the grammar of expressive movement, for example, right? And so this mapping that's one of the aspects. Another very important that needs a lot of work is understanding the variability and the variance in the brain activity, because we are very unique and we have not that data. We need big data for that. But everybody, scientist or not, is concerned with the impact on society. And so when I wrote this grant to National Science Foundation, who is funding the work, I say, well, this is going to have an impact on the general public because they're going to be engaged directly in the research, and it will include children and people with disabilities. Everybody who comes to a museum will have the chance of participating. And and as I went on and on with the study, who has been now going for 2 years, I met people working in art therapy. And they wanted to know how we can optimize the therapy to my patient. We know that aesthetic stimulus, be music, creative movement, or visual art, is a very powerful neuromodulator. We know already that affects your brain, but we don't know how to optimize that to your specific needs. And so we are doing that. So we are working with artists to create stimuli that may be more powerful in some conditions for some people. And if we can understand that response, then maybe we can improve our therapy. And when I talk to teachers, and they tell me, the amount of time that we have at school for art is decreasing, and because we have no metrics, we don't know how to quantify the effect, and so we cannot justify it, right? So they ask for metrics. So we are trying to provide some metrics using brain movement and other aspects, so that they can we can have a dose response, so we can prescribe art, and we can justify it in a more powerful way. So these are just some other examples.
Yeah, so using neuroscience to save art in public schools. Somebody has to save it. Josh, do you have anything to say on this?
Yeah, I think one of the things that it's important for the science community to do and learn is to learn how to articulate the value of art in their science. And sometimes that's a challenge for scientists, because we we don't think that way. You know, we think in outcome measures like the number of publications we get out of a grant, or the you know, if it's health, the impact on patient care. But there are other things there are other ways to measure it. There are other things to measure. And you know, NASA has for a long time had public communication and public outreach as part of its mission. So as an agency, NASA is required not to just do science, but to explain that science to the public. And of course, creative work is a really important part of that. But I think there's another thing that would help in the science community, and that's for the science community to kind of begin to develop an appreciation for the work of doing art, creating art. You know, one of the things that I was reminded of when I started taking classes to do theater and comedy and things was how much work it is. You know, you don't just sit down and create any piece of artwork, whether it's a performance or a painting or a piece of music, just immediately out of thin air. It requires a lot of work. All good creative activity, I think, requires a lot of work, and so appreciating that process, I think, is a really important part of engaging scientists to include art as part of their, you know, grants and stuff, grant writing and so forth. You know, once a scientist figures out how to explain the work that they're doing, then it becomes easier to include it in a grant, whether it's you know, scientific work or creative work, or really the combination of the two, which is, I think, what we're all most interested in.
Great, thank you. So we have, let's see, what time is it? We have about 20 minutes left. This panel, I want to take the chance to open it up to anyone who might have a question right now. Yeah.
I'm just curious. I'd like to see a show of hands of how many artists are actually here.
I'll repeat the question. So how many artists are here? Raise your hand. And maybe it's only one thing that you do. How many scientists are in the room? How many people raise their hand twice? Pretty interdisciplinary group. Any other questions right now? Like I said, we'll circle back to you guys out there.
Just a question.
Oh, sorry, Cynthia.
Julia, it's not a question, but it was an observation of like, one time I had a conversation with a colleague who was a technologist at Bell Labs, and I was mentioning to him part of the difficulty of this art science thing is that on a art museum level, art museums are normally run, and all the curators have an art history background. Many of them never put a piece of paint or pencil. They don't know anything really about the process through their own body, through the doing of the process. So that's why they don't know how hard it is. They know the product, the output, and they can compare that and have context all built up. But this idea of going through each other's processes to know how it's just as much skill building and talent, but also hard work to create a successful product in both fields. But sometimes our society is so concerned with product, you know.
I'll just repeat your comment for Josh in sum. So Cynthia was just mentioning, which is something you brought up about how if you embody the process of another discipline, you actually learn, oh geez, this is like really hard work and I had no idea. And this is kind of a common idea, but what are we gonna do? All spend 20 minutes a day doing someone else's profession? Like, no, we wouldn't get anything done. And there are so many specialties out there now. There didn't used to be. Used to be like a natural philosopher or, you know, a crafts person. But now we have a bajillion specialties. So So maybe we should think about skill sets instead. Maybe we shouldn't define things by what they do, what the project is, but by what they involve, like observation and attention to detail. That's something that's really important as a doctor or as a visual artist if you're trying to diagnose a patient or make a painting. So yeah, very good point though. This is a problem I've thought about before, and I'm like, I don't know what to do about that yet. But yeah, if anyone has ideas. I wanted to throw it out there right now. I would love one thing to come out of this conference is for us to come up with a list of how art has informed science. So for you scientists out there, including you three here, let's start getting a list together, because this is something that will help us convince the NSF to collaborate with the NEA, which they almost did, but it fell through. And that would be a big help to all of us. So yeah, in the back.
I have a question.
I cannot hear you. You have to come closer.
I have a question regarding what point that you're just making, and also Josh alluded to how artists help scientists by visualizing data and informing the public. But I also want to turn around that question, and how do scientists help artists?
Okay, so the question is, how do scientists help artists?
In my experience with the artists I've been collaborating, I found them to be really deep researchers as well. I mean, they do a lot of research before they start working, and so it has been really interesting. The interaction between them and my student myself. Just understanding the vocabulary, right? So that we mean the same thing. It has opened my eyes and theirs, I think. But this is a process, right? I mean, it took time, not only working with the artists, but convincing the museum that this was okay to do, that it will not, there will not be even legal consequences to this. And so now the artists, they provide direct input on the experimental protocol, right? On the creative process from the top down. We debrief them. What was going in your mind. I mean, the nice thing about all these recordings is that we can replay them, and so you have an opportunity to recall the experience and those things that had an impact at that moment. You're gonna be able to recall and write more about it. So and then we let our computers from bottom down to find patterns in the data. And then at some point we match those patterns with the analysis, the top-down based analysis, and then find some very interesting thing that then we can zoom in. This in my mind has been very productive already, and they are co-authors in my papers. They are actually taking these early products of the research to other universities and informing other artists and other engineers, what works, what doesn't work.
Okay. So what I gathered from that, and I agree completely, two main points. One, money. Two, documentation. So these are the two main things that scientists can help artists with. But I want to give one example that Jan started this morning, so this is coming back to you. The streamlined pasta and the chaotic pasta. So we want the chaos because we want to explore, we want to be more creative. That's the way to move the field forward. But how do you make that chaotic pasta in a streamlined way so that it's reproducible, so that NSF and NIH, they understand? I think one idea could be if you have small motifs of that chaotic pasta arranged in a streamlined way, then you have within that streamline the exploration and everything in small scale. That could be one way, and this is just an example how a scientist can help an artist. Coming to your question.
Do you have anything to say about this, Josh?
Yeah, I think just to kind of accumulate a couple of comments here. I think there was a comment earlier about how it's impossible to kind of become an expert in everything, and I think that relates here a little bit, because I think the way that we move forward is to really dive in, to really work closely together, and to do that you have to make an initial choice. Sometimes it's not the right choice, and you have to try again. But we have to. I think we have to find real collaborations that involve spending real time together, and artists do have to become a little bit of a scientist, and scientists do have to become a little bit of an artist in order to truly collaborate and move forward. And I think that happens by spending time together and really learning to, and everyone else kind of touched on this as well, really learning to understand each other's process and each other's work. And by in doing that, I think the grant writing becomes easier. And I've had unsuccessful grants where we've tried to make collaborations before, and I think really part of the reason it didn't work is because we didn't really understand each other well enough to articulate the importance to our own agencies. And so I think part of it is you have to dive in and commit in order to overcome a lot of these barriers.
Thanks. Yeah, I think another point to emphasize is that science has given so much to art. Never mind the technology that artists use now is all built and created by science. But also the scientific method, this kind of methodical approach to thinking, oh, I really want to prove this thing's true, so how do I get there? That is a legitimate and wonderful way to make art. And I speak from personal experience. There's a lot of different kinds of ways to make art, right? But when I go to make a piece, I decide on what I want it to be, and then I figure out how to make it. It's kind of backwards, but it's absolutely informed by the fact that I got my bachelor's in neuroscience, right? So it wasn't intentional. That's just kind of how I came to make work. And so I know a lot of artists who have also benefited from this different way of thinking, because normally, the generalization about making art is, oh, you kind of just walk into your studio and you like mess around with stuff till something beautiful emerges. And that's not the only way about it. But, yeah.
So, just following up on the question about how scientists might benefit artists, we heard both from Josh and from Pepe about having an artist in residence, either hiring a student to create art in the context of the Greenland project, or having an artist in residence in the lab in Houston. Are there any opportunities for scientists in residence at artist retreats or an artist studio? I mean, I have no idea. It just occurred to me. I write proposals and I want to put an artist in residence at where I work. Yeah. So how about the other way around?
Okay, so the question is, if we have artists in residence at labs, can we have scientists in residence in, the artist version of that? I can tell you off the top of my head, no, but I can.
Julia, I had to beg to disagree.
Well,
there are examples.
Okay, good. I'm so glad to be wrong about this, because it's a relief to hear I'm wrong about it. There are a lot of collaborative residencies. And that was just what I wanted to mention to you if you're interested, that are pretty freeform, but yeah.
So one example I heard that there is this very famous mathematician, and she became an artist residence in Art Institute of Chicago for a year because she had a sabbatical and she had money to support herself. So she taught and she learned, and they collaborated. And there are other examples like that.
So is the artist in residence in Houston supporting themselves to come as the artist in residence?
So that's a good question.
I hope not. I hope you're paying.
So let me tell you. So what benefits they find, right? So for example, one of them, after becoming a formal adjunct professor as a visiting artist, she got access to all the resources of the university, access to the library, the computers, 3D printing, and all that, which costs money. And so she was very thankful for that. Now in my grants, I try to have some budget for broader impact activities, and so I can allocate some funding for them to do whatever they want, right? And they are, because they are embedded, they interact with my students. Now let me tell you that I used to recruit a student from engineering. I don't do anymore. I only look at motivation and commitment. So I have students from art, from theater, from dance, from computer science, technology. I found it to be really interesting to put them together. In fact, on Monday we have a workshop. We have a visiting artist and acoustic engineer, sound engineer, and we're gonna have 3 days run a hackathon, and we invited the community at the University of Houston, and gonna explore issues of representation, which are very important for the artists and very important for us, right? So I think that it is hard in grants to put a lot of money for artistic purpose, but we can build some opportunities there in terms of communication, in terms of outreach, in terms of the interaction with the students and access to the facilities. So I think they are very thankful for that, and I'm thankful for their time. And one thing is that, we are taking a risk, right? Trying to develop new technology, new protocols, going against mainstream, and I tell my students, do you realize that we're writing the book here? And I was talking to you yesterday, and that book has some errors, and we just need to be conscious about it and need to realize that no, everything's going to be perfect, and then we should come back and revisit those, right? But we are moving ahead, and we are understanding how to communicate better, not only with artists but with the humanities. My colleagues in psychology, in writing, in English, and so it has been really powerful. Now, to address some of the gaps of communication, I've been organizing a series of conferences. I call it Brain on Art, and Julia has been kind to participate, where it's a conference start, so we have brief presentations, and then we open up this for debate, and I'm very happy to know that because of these meetings, different collaborations have emerged, and going beyond that particular meeting. So I think we need to do more of that. I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about it, but that's the way I had this.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, so I think am I the only educator in the room? I mean,
No.
Okay, good. Yeah, so I just want to say, so I'm an educational researcher, and we do a lot of work on interdisciplinary collaborations in the classroom. And I'm wondering whether this conversation will be better moved forward if we think about the fact that a lot of the assumptions that we have about the disciplines begin in the classroom. We inculcate in the students very early on that this is what art does, this is what science does, and we fail to show them that all the disciplines have a very strong purpose in why they were developed. All disciplines are basically humanly invented. We created them, right? The academies created them. And over the years, we have started to create these ways of thinking about the academies as methods, right, and content. But we fail to see that there is purpose, because all artists, all scientists, all historians, and all that are driven by a sense of purpose about what they want to do. They want to understand the world. They want to radically imagine a world that they can live in, that we can sustain it, and we fail to always think about that. And I think that what I hear you all doing is that you are radically reimagining what your discipline can do. And if we can actually bring that kind of dispositional quality to the students in the classroom, then we can look forward to a generation, maybe 1 or 2 generations later on. Maybe I'm not going to live long enough to see that happening, but at least if we start that going, we can actually get people to start thinking that, you can be both artistic and scientific. And you don't have to be an artist or a scientist, because those tend to hem us in, and we silo ourselves every time we tie our dispositions to an identity. And that identity is what is going to be the prison that keeps us in this non-sustainable world that we live in.
I'm glad you brought this up at the beginning of the day. Applause to that. So talking about education and where the siloing begins. I'm sure you've heard of the STEAM educational movement. A lot of us in here are involved in that either officially or unofficially, just in the way we try and teach. And yeah, it does start early. So anyone in academia, that's where a lot of the work can get done. Yeah, we have time for one more quick question back there.
I'm interested in, I think part of the difficulty with collaboration sometimes is the economics of being an artist and the economics of being a scientist. So I work as a naturalist, I do some field work, I'm also a writer. And as a writer, I don't get money until I publish something, right? I don't get paid unless there's a grant. I mean, I think it's more normal for an artist to scrape by and figure out how to do the work and then get paid, hopefully, by the gig, by the painting, by the book, whatever is produced. And for scientists, there's an expectation that you'll be paid for the process leading up to whatever the product is. And I think we need to talk about that, because I think it makes it really difficult to collaborate because of that different way of working and the different juggling of schedules and finances that both worlds entail.
Yeah, so for those of you who can hear, just the fact that artists get paid when they produce something, hopefully. I mean, God knows we all make stuff and then it goes in our closet forever. And scientists get paid along the way. Yeah, art is less of a job in that way, which is kind of weird because it feels like a job because you get up and you do it.
And it's freeing and not freeing, right? I mean, there are advantages to either way, I think. But I think we need to understand that about each other.
Yes, definitely. Well. All right, we are just on time here, so I want to thank Josh and Pepe and Drew for sharing really, really awesome stories. Actually, I have hope for the future of how we can get more artists involved in science. So thank you very much.
Thank you.